welcome to another episode of SD's podcast where Dom and Connor talk about stuff.
Thanks for joining.
And so today what we have for you is a little bit of an introductory on exercise science. Dominic here actually has a master's in it from Merrimack College, and so there's plenty of information that we'll be able to give you. But today we're just going to focus on kind of the basics. So if you're maybe just getting into the gym and you want to know how to build your routine based off of your goals, your ability, and you just kind of want to get to know a little bit more about the science on how it all works to make sure that you have an understanding of what you're doing when you're in the gym. We're going to go over the difference between strength, hypertrophy, and endurance, and the crossover between the three as well. We're going to talk about cardiovascular health, nutrition, and then at the very end give you a quick rundown on what we're doing in our own programs right now. So Dom, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, so in regards for the exercise science realm, thank you, Connor. There's a lot of information that can be interpreted, and there's a lot of different things in exercise science that are constantly evolving because we learn different things about the body every single day. So every day it is kind of like a groundbreaking science just to see like the body's abilities to like what it's capable of, and just like not only what your own capabilities are, but like the capabilities of people of all different types, sizes, ages, genders, whatever it may be. Every body is different, so everyone's going to have different adaptations to various types of exercise, whether it be strength, hypertrophy, endurance, whatever the case may be. So even with myself and Connor, for an example, Connor comes from a different background of postural correction and personal training. So in the sense, we do have some similarities in terms of like having to go through the core credentials of like your anatomy and phys, your biomechanics, your kinesiology, a little bit of like talking about like the bony anatomy, and then diving a little bit more into like systems and organs and things like that. And then we kind of start to spread off into more specified fields. So Connor's, for example, is to make sure that your body is properly aligned, that your joints are stacked nice and even, and just your posture is nice and tall to ensure that you're going to reduce chances of compensation. You're actually going to have more energy because things are going to be a lot more up and open and be able to flow a lot more freely as well. And it's also just going to put you in a better mood because your body's just going to be able to function the way that it was meant to, as opposed to when times we get compensations, things may be working, but not necessarily as to how they should be working.
The idea is prevention and optimization of your mechanics.
Exactly. So whereas with Connor, he'll take that to more of like our general pop clients and some of the older clients that come in. Whereas with myself, I do focus on posture and I do focus on correcting it. We just have two different tactics on how to do that. So Connor does a lot of assistive stretching. I do a lot of dynamic and mobility movements as well. So my specialty is definitely more in the athletic field and how different stimuluses can help perform in sports settings, where with Connor, yes, he's training performance, but he's doing more day-to-day performance as opposed to with playing a sport like football or basketball or even like tennis. You have some time to kind of lead yourself up to a season. Whereas with your general pop client, they kind of don't have something to work up towards like an event or something like that. But just for them to function in their every day-to-day life, what can we do as professionals to make that easier for them?
Right. So first thing we're going to kind of get into is muscle fiber types. Okay, when we're talking about the difference between strength, hypertrophy, and endurance, the body has adapted over time, obviously through, I guess you could say, evolution, but the idea is everyone's body is a little different, and the muscle fiber types that make up the majority of your body are going to vary depending on your structure and your genes. And so, for example, Dom's body, his muscle mass is more built so he can pull some weight off the floor. Mine is built in the other direction where I can run for a decent period of time. And so the correlation between the muscle fiber types and then how you build on those in the gym doesn't mean that you're going to be limited to only one realm of fitness. I've spent some few years in bodybuilding as well, and then Dom is also no stranger to cardio. And so the idea is it's just really what your body is going to excel at versus what else are you able to do. One thing that kind of puts a lot of this into like a nutshell are the three body types you might come across in fitness, being ectomorph like myself, mesomorph, and then an endomorph. And the idea is each one of those three categories resides in a certain accumulation of muscle fiber types in their body and how those muscle fibers react to the stress you put on them. So go ahead, Dom, and kind of explain some more about like the different kind of muscle fiber types.
Yeah, so kind of taking off what Connor said, so when you kind of get into the three different body types, every body, like we had mentioned, is going to be different. So if you look at someone like an ectomorph, someone like with Connor's frame, he's taller, he's a little bit more slender. Someone like him may have better cardiovascular endurance, but in terms of trying to put on size and mass, it might be a little bit more challenging just due to how his muscles are built, and that his muscles are a little bit longer, so it's going to require more force and more strain to be placed upon him in order to make certain adaptations. Whereas someone like myself, being an endomorph, I'm a little bit more broad in the shoulders, I'm a little bit shorter, I can put on weight very easily. But for me to cut weight is very challenging because I'm meant to having that larger, wider frame. So the mesomorph is kind of like the beauty of both. You kind of have you can kind of have the tall slenderness, but you're also able to put on that size and put on mass and develop your body a little bit more simplified as to what you want it to get to. So the mesomorph, again, is kind of like the beauty of both. However, you really can't choose your body type, so the best thing that you can do is just learn as to how it works and just work with what you got. So to kind of dive in a little bit into some of the fiber types as to how certain fibers may differentiate. So there is a principle said, it's called the SAID principle rather, and it basically means specific adaptation to impose demand. It's just a big fancy way of saying when you place stress upon your body needs to adapt to it to get the job of what it's trying to do done, whether it be through cardiovascular fitness, resistance training, nutrition. Your body is going to have to go through some type of change neurologically and physiologically in order to get the results as to what you're striving to get to. So for diving into the muscle fiber types, we'll start off with type 1. So type 1 fibers are typically meant to be resistant fatiguing. So someone like Connor, for an example, that can run longer durations of time, like doing obstacle course races, bicycles, like almost like marathon style training for long periods of time, you're more bound to have those type 1 resistant fatigue resistant fibers. So it's just going to be able to help you maintain that endurance and pace for a longer duration of time.
It's like a larger bundle of fibers that are smaller in diameter, but they're built to withstand a constant stress as opposed to a heavy load.
So for an example as to like where some of those muscles would be, your calves. So when you're running, your calves are kind of like your power pumpers in order to make sure that you're continuously striding when you run or walk or whatever the case may be, and they're built for that endurance. They may not be as strong off the bat, but there is ways that you can train to help get that endurance to just get you that much longer. So again, those are going to be type 1 fibers. We also have two different types of type 2 fibers. So we have type 2X, which is going to be your fast twitch fibers. So type 2X is basically going to be things that are going to be more explosive, not as long in terms of endurance. So someone like a running back or maybe like an Olympic weightlifter that needs to have short bouts of power for a short duration of time is more likely to have those type 2 explosive fibers because they're a lot more powerful. It's going to develop a lot more strength and acceleration as well. And the only thing is though, is that power can only be withstained for X period of time. Once you start to hit a certain threshold, that power that may have gotten you to that point is going to slowly start to go down. For an example, if you have a sprinter trying to do a marathon and you have them run at the same rate as if they're trying to like run like a 40-yard dash or a 100-meter sprint or whatever the case is, they're going to start off very quick. They're going to hit a point that they're going to be able to maintain, and then you're going to start to slowly see that decline because all of that power that they use to kind of get that momentum to initiate is now just starting to kind of slowly go down, almost like a battery. So again, type 2 X fibers are going to be those more powerful, fast twitch fibers that again are going to be a little bit prone to getting fatigued more quickly. And then kind of the beauty of both again with the 3 body types. So with our muscle fiber types, there is something called type 2A fibers, which is basically the mesh of both endurance fibers and fast twitch fibers. So for an example, people like hockey players, rugby players, soccer, that it's a constant change of tempo from jogging to sprinting, from jogging to full acceleration, because the pace is consistent and only the tempos are more so changing. You need to have a combination of those fibers that are going to be able to prevent fatigue and also be able to turn on for explosiveness when required to make sure that you can either oust the defender, get around a net, be able to beat a certain time, and then be able to dial it back to those slower paces just to maintain when you're, whether on defense or not in possession or whatever the case may be. So again, having the combination of both of those fiber types in a type 2A fiber is going to be very beneficial for endurance but power athletes as well.
So to put that in perspective, when we look at the strength, hypertrophy, and endurance range of strength training, the muscle fiber types is kind of ground zero of the understanding, okay? Knowing what each muscle fiber type does. Everyone has all the types, but the amount and ratio of what your body is made up of will change. So that's then categorized into the ecto, meso, and endo ranges. If you kind of know where you're at there, then you know what you might be able to excel in or what you might be disposed to. So going off of that, we're going to talk a little bit more around the sets and reps in the volume used to get you where you want to go. So let's say, for example, you are maybe someone on like the skinnier side, and you want to try and build some muscle. Now, right off the bat, if you're starting with a skinny frame, you're probably ending up in the ectomorph range. And so what you want to do is, again, this is talking more about the goal of wanting to build muscle, not necessarily the goal of catering towards what your body might already be built for. You know, you could be like myself. I started out like a very skinny person, very underweight, and I put on a lot of muscle over time. And if I wanted to gear myself towards running, I might be more successful at that than powerlifting or bodybuilding. However, that doesn't mean I don't still want to try and build muscle, and that's how I started. So you want to overload your body with resistance in a safe way, of course. And the idea is using high volume and heavy weight, not quite all the way to a strength perspective, but you want to be in that gray area between the neuromuscular adaptation of strength and the hypertrophic growth of hypertrophy. You want to go right in between, because you need to tell your body, these are two things I don't have that I need. And like Dom mentioned with the SAID principle, what you tell your body to do, essentially, it will do to a point. And so I spend a lot of time doing 4-bys. I always do a minimum of 4 sets, even to today. You could call the first set like a warm-up set. The second set might be a learning set. Third set might be a practice set. And the fourth set could be a challenge set. So every set has a purpose. And then sometimes the rep ranges will change. But the idea is the end of that rep, that last rep, should feel very hard to do, but you should be able to complete it with good form. But it should be a struggle. So generally, 4 by 8 to 10 is what I find to be the golden volume, and especially for someone who's trying to put on size, because that extra set is increasing the fatigue, and it's kind of helping those endurance muscle fibers. Okay, it's allowing you to work a little bit more over time, but the load that you're lifting in the exercise is ending at 8 to 10. Usually in the beginning, you might be getting more towards that 10. You shouldn't be able to get past that. If you do, you gotta up the weight or slow down the rep a little bit. And then, you can go as low as 6. Any lower than that, and you're pretty much looking in the strength realm, which again is fine to do, but what I've found is because I have a small frame, I have small joints. My joints are naturally less stable than Dom's. And so if I go to move, like do a clean and jerk, I am more susceptible to injury than he is. And so that's something that I want to be.
I don't know, man. My bones are like made of glass, so you may stand a chance.
Well, apples to oranges. But the idea here is definitely work towards your goal, do it safely, and be mindful about what your body is telling you in the process. And of course, it's important to switch it up. So you might be doing that 4 by 8 to 10 for a period, but then it may be good to switch to 3 by 15 and 20 because again, you are made up of mostly a certain muscle fiber type, and you do want to stimulate those. But you also want to challenge them, and then maybe one day go into a 5 by 5 where you're doing 1 to 2 more sets with a very heavy resistance, doing very few reps. That's more of a neuromuscular adaptation. That's when the brain is telling the body we need to create a new level of tolerance and stress. There will be a muscular adaptation for that, generally hypertrophy, but it's actually more of a software change than it is muscular. Now, when we're looking into the endurance ranges, generally the rule of thumb you'll find there is a 3 by 15. Again, I like to stick to four sets. Some of that might come down to preference. 15 is also a good way to go, and that's kind of where I train at now because you're favoring your endurance fibers, but you're still allowing yourself to hold on to some hypertrophy. And so, again, depending on your protein intake, your sleep, and all the other factors that go into building muscle, assuming that's all in check, which we'll kind of talk about a little bit later in nutrition, that is going to set you up for where you want to go. And I currently train for sports that require me to be a little explosive, but also go for a pretty decent period of time. So I go mountain biking. Mountain biking is very dynamic. It's up, down, left, right, jump this, and don't crash. So when I'm doing that, it's cardio, but my legs need to have that endurance to keep powering. An obstacle racing, I have a little bit of running between the obstacles, and some of those races have longer periods of running in between the obstacles than others. Then when I get to the obstacle, I might have to support my body weight through a climbing rig, or I might have to pick up a heavy object and carry it for a period of time. So then all of a sudden, I'm going from cardio to strength. And the ability to go from back and forth has really created a lot of changes in the body.
So, and it sounds like from that to kind of like summarize like some of the points that we've talked about. So if we were to like almost like kind of classify Connor's body type, he is an ectomorphic body because he has this taller, more slender bend. He is dominantly going to have those type 1 fibers because again, he is more an endurance athlete, but in terms of the biking and the obstacle course racing, again, for someone that might have those type 1 fibers, you're always able to again make those adaptations to what your body needs to do. So from Connor's training, it seems as though, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you're almost trying to get to a point of adapting your fibers through training to almost have like that type 2X of like the type 2A rather of the fast twitch for like when you're going uphill and you need your calves and legs to kind of keep pumping, and then more of the endurance of when you're going downhill, whether you're standing on the bike, whether you have to shift, you're going to be able to need some type of endurance in order to stay stable, whether it's on the way up or just continuing your way up, or whether it's trying to just stabilize the bike on your way down. So
I train for reactivity. So
exactly.
whatever my body needs to be able to do in a given period of time, it can do. again, that doesn't mean that I'm going to excel in marathoning or powerlifting, but I like to stay in a range where I can still have a wide scope of things that my body can do on the fly, and be able to participate in a little bit of anything. But again, so if we're talking more about like the general public just getting started in the gym, if you're a bigger person and you want to try and get more distance in running or in biking, then you would be training more towards that endurance range, because your heavy, thick muscle fibers need to be exhausted over a longer period of time. And so that would be kind of looking at the other end of the spectrum. You might not have the endurance to go very long, so you might cut your sets down to about 3 sets. And then that 15 to 20 rep range is what you're looking for. And then again, though, you still always want to try and confuse the body, throw a few different things in there to favor the muscle types you have, but be able to stay reactive and move your body into a general direction you want to be without having to sacrifice what it wants to do best.
Yeah.
Now, that's kind of covering muscle fiber types and the strength, hypertrophy, and endurance spectrum. The next thing we kind of want to talk about is cardiovascular health. This is arguably one of the most important parts of your exercise routine and your daily life, because our bodies function mechanically, and that's very important for our mobility, and that has a big effect on a lot of other things in our body. It does have an effect on cardiovascular health. It does have an effect on mental health and everything in between. So when we're looking at cardio, though, it doesn't mean you need to be running a sub 20-minute 5K. It means that you need to be able to have your heart rate elevated to a certain point for a certain amount of time in order to make sure that that part of your body stays strong, because ultimately you do need cardio health to have muscular health and to have neurologic, gut, and systemic health. It's ultimately what's cycling your blood and oxygen, which are two things that you kind of need to stay alive. So you don't have to be a cardiac athlete to have good cardiac health, but you do want to make sure that you do practice that in any range of fitness that you're in.
And with cardio, I think a lot of times people get the misinterpretation that like it has to be on a bike or treadmill or even a rower, and it has to be something like
it's kind of stagnant.
Yeah, just long and stagnant and miserable.
Does not need to be like
so that. In regards for the long portion, it is going to definitely be a little bit longer, because again, the point is to train for longevity and endurance. So the more time that you're training, the more you're just going to be simulating that endurance for the event that you may need it for. There are ways of doing cardio that's not as long. That's something more along the lines of HIIT training, which just stands for high intensity interval training. Basically, that's going to require a little bit more power and strength and cardiovascular health, just because it's almost like doing like resisted weighted cardio. The reason that I phrase it like that is that because it doesn't always necessarily have to be bars, dumbbells, whatever the case is. We do a lot of work with like bands, body weight. Your body's essentially a weight against itself, sled work, TRXs. So there's a bunch of different tools that you can use to, again, help to spike up that heart rate. And then once you're kind of in that high intensive range, how long can you maintain that for?
Now that would be more of the endurance realm. In HIIT training, it would be coming up to the top and then bringing it back down. How fast can you come back down? Because that's another measure of cardiac health, is how quickly can you recover. So HIIT training is more about being able to spike the heart rate, keep it for a little bit of time, but then recover it. And that's the interval part. So you kind of have that interval up, interval down.
Exactly.
And then, cardio health as a wide, broad sense would be a little bit more of like what we're saying with the endurance. That's more of a plateau. That's getting the heart rate up and keeping it steady.
Okay. So for an example, someone like, kind of going back to the example of people that have those type 2 fibers, or the type 2X fibers, the type 2A fibers, it's going to be the crossbreed of both. Someone that has both those fiber types are going to, again, need that endurance portion. So when they do, their heart rate will probably be a little bit lower because they're not working as hard. They're more so just trying to maintain. And when they need those bigger spikes of energy or like a rush or need to have a breakaway, their heart is going to then start to ramp up the intensity because they need more oxygen and air supplied throughout their body to meet the demands of what they need to do. Right. So someone like a soccer player, rugby player, hockey player is going to have that constant change in their heart rate, which is whereas someone like a marathon runner, for an example, if you're doing the same pace for 26.2 miles, you're going to want to maintain a comfortable steady state heart rate because the goal of a marathon isn't how fast can you complete it, even though some people may try to measure that. The goal is just being able to maintain a comfortable pace to be able to go through that 26.2 miles safely and without compensations. So there is a lot of difference in terms of the training principles as to what you're trying to train when it comes to trying to focus on power and strength athletes versus endurance athletes.
Now, how do you do cardio? Just like the measurement of sets and reps under strength, we have calculating your heart rate. And there's a very simple way to kind of go about that. First, you're going to figure out what is the maximum that your heart can do. And, it's not that you want to be pushing at the max the whole time. We're going to take a percentage of that. So generally, the formula would be the number 220 minus your age. So for me, my maximum heart rate is about 192. And so that means that is the maximum that it should get up to if I'm training. Shouldn't really go past that. I don't need to be at that for very long. Now, if you are already a very healthy athlete and you're used to pushing your heart rate, you can be in that range and you can go past it. But that's not a rule of thumb for anyone just starting out or just someone who's doing cardio casually. It can be very dangerous. So what you would do in that case is take a percentage of that maximum and then train at that. Different percentages land up in different zones. And those zones ultimately determine what's happening in your body during that cardio exercise. So
sorry, not to cut you off. So in regards for kind of going back to the calculated heart rate, so they actually use that as something called age predicted maximum heart rate. If you are a prestigious or an elite athlete, like something like Connor was saying, there's a big science that you can get into. People that train at elevation, things like that, their heart is going to have to function differently in order to produce oxygen. So someone that, for an example, let's say, so Connor's heart rate's 192. If Connor were to go to Colorado for, let's say, 3 months and be in a place with higher elevation where the air pressure is less, his heart rate is going to actually increase because it needs to pump more blood to meet the demands of not as much oxygen in the air. So if you let's say Connor's little vacation to Colorado ends and he decides to come back to New Hampshire, for X amount of time that he spent in Colorado, he's going to have X amount of time being at a lower altitude, but his heart rate is still going to be working the same as if he's still in that higher climate. This is something called altitude training. They do this a lot for Olympic sports. They actually have the USA Training Center out in Colorado, just so that way, depending as to where the Olympics are held, they can be prepared. So when Connor comes back down, let's say he goes to run a marathon, maybe it takes him like 4 hours to run a regular marathon. If he were to go to Colorado and come back, because his heart rate's going to be working at a higher pace, his recovery is probably going to be a little bit better because it's working more efficiently. So that 4-hour marathon that he may have ran prior, he might be able to do that in 3.5 hours if his heart rate is still working at that same capacity. So it's crazy that, again, kind of going back to the heart rate thing, that even though you may have this age predicted max heart rate, like Connor was saying, there are people that are going to have maximum heart rates that they're able to kind of push through because they have that ability to recover as well as what they're able to.
Speaking of recovery, let's talk about lactic acid.
Oh yeah.
So lactic acid is honestly at this point more of a buzzword than an actual understanding of what it is. People like to complain about lactic acid, and there is a reason for that. Generally, lactic acid, what it actually is a result of aerobic metabolism. And so when you're doing cardio, you're consuming oxygen. And this can go for the same with strength training too. Generally a little bit more in the endurance ranges, but you're consuming that oxygen. That oxygen enters the lungs. And then when it's in the lungs, it gets diffused into this tissue called the alveoli. And then from there, there's an exchange between oxygen and carbon dioxide that then pulls the carbon dioxide out of the blood but puts the oxygen in. Then it gets sent to the heart, and the heart pumps it out through the rest of the body. It's called perfusion. And then as the blood is getting through the body, it's being dispersed through the capillaries into the tissue of the muscle. Now, the more oxygen that you're taking in, the faster this process has to happen. And at a certain point, when the stress of the muscle is exceeding the ability for the oxygen to enter the tissue, what's going to happen is the body needs to compensate. For that muscle to keep working, even if it can't keep up with the amount of oxygen coming in, it's going to start to secrete an acid out of the tissue, and that is your lactic acid. And that is essentially a byproduct of what the muscle produces to compensate for lower oxygen. Now, at the end of the workout, that lactic acid is still there. It's gunked up on your muscle. And so basically the idea is, they're always saying stretch, foam roll. But the reason for that is you want to squeegee that lactic acid off of the muscle, because if you don't, it's going to sit there and it's going to bind to the muscle fiber and it's going to make it tighter. And then, it kind of gets all gooey with the fascia as well. And then now you just have messy muscle. So the idea is, especially in endurance and cardio performances where you're more susceptible to that process, you need to clean your muscle. You need to get that junk off of it. And over time, as your cardiac health improves and your breathing improves, you're not going to accumulate as much lactic acid, but you still will always get some to a degree. And so you want to make sure that you clean that off. But that's essentially what it is it's a byproduct from your training. But, if you just kind of leave it there, then it can become an issue. Adversely, if we're looking into heavy lifting, training like that, you'll still get some lactic acid, but more what it is your muscle fibers are shortening and tearing so much during your workout that if you don't stretch after, overall your muscle fibers are going to get smaller or shorter and shorter and shorter until you have loss of range of motion and joint mobility. And so for that recovery, you need to be stretching more. Generally, one way to kind of know that you're building lactic acid is the burn that you feel. When you're feeling the burn in a wall sit, that's lactic acid. And so if you're feeling it in a certain spot, that's where you got to roll it out after.
Absolutely. And so in combination with the lactic acid as well, like Connor was saying, it is a byproduct, and also hydrogen accumulation is also part of the burning sensation that you may feel when your muscles are starting to kind of get to the point of that fatigue. The best way to kind of almost describe your body, as cliche as it is that it really is almost like a piece of machinery or like a car. If you have a car that doesn't get an oil change very frequently, the oil is just going to start to get clumpy, it's going to build residue, it's going to kind of start backlogs and things like that. Almost the same thing with lactic acid. It's just going to inhibit your range of motion, your overall flexibility and mobility, the same way that oil would inhibit the engine for being able to process gas and run smoothly.
It'll also make you feel more tired the next time you go do a workout because your muscles are stiff and that lactic acid is still there. So then you're adding more on top of it and you're not going to be able to perform as well.
And to have those micro tears in your fibers as you're working out, you are going to become more fatigued because now you have the lactic acid and hydrogen accumulation accumulated from the prior workout. You have the lack of range of motion and mobility to kind of get you through those movements. And now you're going to be more likely vasoconstricted, and blood's not going to be able to supply those certain muscle groups and areas that you need oxygen more efficiently. So by making sure that you're stretching and doing your recovery, it's definitely going to make sure that it's going to help your cardiovascular endurance, your strength, hypertrophy, just about everything. So the three kind of all go hand in hand together. And in addition to that too, one of the things that we're also going to dive into is nutrition, also how that can also assist in your recovery. So there's multiple different things besides just stretching, fascia rolling, trigger point therapy that you need to do in order to recover. So kind of going back to the car example, nutrition is the gas and the oil that you put in your car to make sure it can go. If you're buying gas that's going to be watered down, which would be kind of the equivalent to someone that tries to work out a crappy diet, yes, you're still going to be able to make progress, but probably not as efficiently as someone that has.
It'd be a rough process.
Exactly. It's going to be a lot more challenging of a process as opposed to someone that has clean, efficient fuel and good emissions. The car is going to be able to run more smoothly. It's going to be able to run longer. It's going to get more mile per gallon out of it. The higher the quality of the nutrients and ingredients that you put into your body, it's going to do the same thing. You're just going to feel more energized. You'll start to shed off a couple more pounds. Your body won't have to be as stressed, holding as much weight onto you too. It's going to allow things to maintain that elasticity and looseness. So there's a lot of things that can come into play with your recovery just based off of like the nutrients, I guess, that you're kind of putting into it.
So what is nutrition? Basically, we do have another podcast lined up that is going to be all on nutrition. So we're just going to kind of scratch the surface about it. Again, at the end of the day, we want this episode here to be talking about you're just starting and you want to know the science behind everything that's going to be happening and the changes. So when we're looking at the nutrition, we have the trinity of macros. Macro is kind of like your major energy source that powers the body. And so we got your fat, carb, and protein. And if you want to put it in a proper order, it's carb, fat, protein. Basically, your carbs is your body's primary energy source. And so you can be afraid of carbs, and there are carbs that are better than other carbs. That's called simple versus complex. And so those are going to be your body's front line for fuel. And then fat is more of like a storage unit. That's kind of where nutrients go to sit and wait to be used. And there's a whole process called, glycolysis.
Yep.
That allows that to be stored. The third one is protein, and protein is like the toolkit for your body. It's what's going to repair your muscle and keep the blood flowing well with the proteins involved. So when we're looking at carbs, the two types that we're going to focus on are simple and complex. Your simple carb is your bread, rice, usually the whites that you find. Your complex would be your potatoes, your veggies. And the idea is your simple carb is going to burn very quickly. When you eat it, it will be used or should be used very quickly. And then a complex carb is going to take a little longer to break down. So if you're looking at this from an energy perspective, your simple carb is going to be your short boost of energy. So let's say you have like a 5K coming up and you eat some bread before. You're going to have that energy spike for a short period of time, and then you're going to burn out. So you need that balance of carbs. You start eating some more complex carbs, now you still have an energy source that can burn for a longer period of time. And that's generally what you want in those endurance events. And then a balance of both is always good, because the other thing outside of macros is also nutrients and like minerals, things like that, that also play a part in nutrition and diets as well. Fats, there's good fats and there's bad fats. And obviously we want to try and make sure that we, especially in this realm, focus on the healthier ones.
Fats, avocados, tree nuts.
Exactly.
A lot of times I think with the nutrition thing, people can get misinformed by just information that they perceive to believe may be true, or maybe they read something on the internet that may not 100% be accurate. So with the nutrition, like we said, we're only trying to scratch the surface, because one of the things that we will discuss in our next podcast is different nutrition trends that people either find to be healthy and aren't always the best option, or things that may be believed but may not always be what they may appear. So to kind of lead off where Connor kind of stopped with the three macros, one that isn't necessarily considered a macro but is essential to everyday life: hydration and water. You need to stay hydrated in order to make sure that your body is running as smoothly and efficiently as possible. It is pretty much the one thing that will keep you going. I know people love caffeine and things like that. Caffeine is a diuretic that actually pulls water from your body. So in order to make sure you're getting the most out of that energy, you need to replenish yourself with what's being taken from you from the caffeine.
And I am actually very surprised by the amount of people that have come to me saying that they got some of their water in today because they had a coffee, and that coffee has water. And
yeah,
no, yes, coffee has water, but it is not going to hydrate you. It does not count as hydration.
It can't, so in terms of total hydration, it can count towards how many ounces of fluids you consume that day. But to a point, there are going to be certain fluids like caffeine, alcohol, that are going to pull water from your system. So when you're pulling that water, you need to be able to replace it, because where that water is getting pulled from, it's essentially getting pulled from your muscles. You're kind of almost wringing them out.
It ends up being one step forward and two steps back.
Mm-hmm.
The best way to go is just drink normal water.
Yep.
And so, you'll always see either of us with a water bottle.
They also make awesome ones that have times on it to help people be more accountable, just to make sure they're drinking enough. A lot of times people tend to ask as to how much water they should be drinking. So just for a safe rule of thumb, I typically say take your body weight, and you can either do one of two things. You can either try to divide that in half and see as to what you may get in ounces for water. Or another way to do it, if you want to kind of start off a little bit smaller, maybe take your body weight, convert it to kilograms. That will give you a smaller amount, and then drink whatever that number is in ounces. Because a lot of times what people say is, well, when I drink too much water, I feel like I have to pee all the time, or my stomach hurts, or whatever the case may be. Your body definitely needs to build a tolerance as to how much water it is able to take in and withstand and handle. But I would say that by starting off small, whether it's just by getting a water bottle, or even just trying to have a cup of water before every meal, and then
right when you wake up,
or right when you wake up, there are different little tips and tricks that it's going to be a lot easier for you to get hydration. And even if you don't like water per se, I would definitely make sure to try to drink something that has some type of electrolytes in it, because that will also help in assisting with just maintaining healthy hydration. Because sodium, potassium, iron, zinc, magnesium, all of that is excreted when you sweat, and when you're putting those electrolytes to use for whatever it may be for. So you need to have certain things, whether it's electrolyte supplements like powders, like liquid IVs, or different types of foods that are going to help you be able to, one, replenish all those minerals to get into your muscles, and also help replenish the minerals to help maintain that water intake as well.
One drink like that would be good a day. I wouldn't make every water bottle you drink throughout the day like that.
Exactly.
Regular water, there is no substitute for. And like you mentioned, the more hydrated you become, the more you have to pee. And as much as that can be an inconvenience, we have to kind of keep in mind that that's a good thing, because your pee is how your body gets rid of waste. Mm-hmm. And it's how you kind of detox. And so drinking a lot of water is going to help keep your system running smoothly and clean. It's going to keep you alert, helps your eyes. You'll notice that in the morning, if you kind of walk around outside before you drink some water, you might feel a bit more tired, you're not as focused, and then as soon as you drink a glass of water, it's like there's color. And that's because when you drink water, your eyes now finally actually have a little bit of hydration, and then that improves your vision as well. So I mean, that's one of hundreds of benefits to drinking water outside of the obvious one, just keeping yourself alive.
It's definitely
So-
one of the one-all, cure-all type of methods. Granted, it won't cure everything, but it will definitely assist with a lot.
Now, that's pretty much what we want to touch on for the nutrition. Like we said, we do have another episode coming out that's going to dive a little bit deeper into that. But at the end of the day, we kind of talked a little bit about what Dom and I do for our own routines. Like I mentioned, right now I do a lot of obstacle course racing. We run a team out of Sheer Dominance here. We do have a few races lined up for the season. We're really looking forward to it. And so I usually, when I do my training, I do at least 2 to 3 runs a week, usually around 5 miles each. And then I do a lot of resistance training, mostly with my body weight, because that's what I need to be able to throw around. But I also do use weights as well, because I have to kind of factor my mountain biking, where I try to do that at least once a week, maybe twice if I have the time. Though that I do more personally, that's a bit more of a competition, but it's also just for fun. I like to make sure I balance it with both. But either way, in my opinion, to make it more fun, I need to be better at it, and I need to be more comfortable. I need to have better cardio, because then I have a more fun ride, a better ride. And so, the weight of my bike is also factored into my training, and working with weights to be able to stay in control. Beyond that, I always found working with body weight to be very comfortable, a lot more core engaging. I've learned a lot more about proprioception and how to control my body. So I usually implement that a lot with my clients as well, but I also don't shy away from cables, bands, free weights, things like that. So yeah, I mean, my training is a little over the place right now because I have a lot of different goals, but I have structured them in a way where they coincide with each other at a certain point. And I do have phases of the year that I build to focus on one and then turn it into the next. My biggest thing on protein is that I need to take in a lot of protein, or biggest thing on nutrition would be that I take in a lot of protein, because since my muscle doesn't grow easily, I need to constantly feed it to make sure that as I'm doing my cardio, I'm not losing muscle mass. I also have to stay very hydrated, and I can usually afford to eat more because of my activity level, but I make sure that I stay within a fair range, and I also get a caloric deficit each day to just help to stay lean. But beyond that, that's pretty much my current program in a nutshell.
Yeah, so to kind of talk about myself, I definitely right now, so I'm about 12 weeks out for my next bodybuilding competition. So the biggest thing for me right now is going to be just trying to focus on getting more lean in terms of just burning more fat. So that's just going to be a lot of cardio intensive purposes. So again, kind of combining that high intensity interval training to kind of hope to target more fat, as well as endurance as well, just to make sure that I'm able to kind of do cardio for long periods of time and just increase my cardiovascular health. All those things are going to help me when I get into my resistance training, be able to push bigger lifts if I'm able to pump more blood throughout my body to the muscles that demand it and need it. So in regards for how my training is going right now, I am training in the sense of doing a little bit of everything. So I definitely train for strength, hypertrophy, and endurance. I try to revolve my lifts every week, so that way there's a different focus on the lift, whether I'm trying to go for big weights, lighter weights, higher reps, lower reps, whatever the case may be. It really just depends as to where my training cycle kind of falls into. So in the way that I like to manipulate my training cycles are pretty interesting. So a lot of times I will try to take my training volume, which is going to be the total sets and reps and weights that you did that day, and use those principles to try to manipulate them in order to make sure that I'm still making strides. So for a quick example, if you were to do 3 sets of 10 on a bench press, you could probably put up some pretty good weight. However though, if once you start getting into the heavier weights, you may not be able to get that bench press for that 10 reps. So sometimes what I'll typically do is like if I can bench 135 for 10, but if I were to put 315 on the bar, if I can do that for 10, then that's a great day. But not everyone's built like that. So something that I might do is if you do 3 sets of 10 reps, it's going to be a total of 30 reps. If you take the numbers and flop them around and do 10 sets of 3, the end result is still going to be a total of 30 reps. It's going to be a lot easier to get 315 on a bench press for 3 and take it in sets of 10 as opposed to trying to put it up for 10 straight reps. Again, the end work is still going to be 30 total reps.
But what you're demanding on your body there is strength versus hypertrophy.
Exactly. So a lot of times I will take my intervals and my volume and intensities and kind of manipulate those principles in order to help me keep adapting. And I do that same thing with all of my clients as well. I'll usually, depending on as to where we are, in some days we train for strength, some days we train for hypertrophy, and some days we train for endurance. So depending as to which one it is that day, we kind of just style the sets and reps and the exercises to what they specifically need towards their goals and what the focal point is of training that day. And we just take it from there, and that's how we continue to just track progress and make strides.
So today we went over essentially how to view your start of a program, why things are put together a certain way, a little bit of the science behind how fitness works at a base level, talking about the muscle, cardio, nutrition, and just examples of what we do. So if you're ever looking to have a program built for you or some help building your own, we're definitely a resource that's going to reach out and make sure that we can get you going to exactly where you need to be and want to be. But other than that, thank you very much for tuning in, and stick around for the next one.
Thanks for joining.